Tom sat hunched against a weathered brick wall, his rugged appearance a stark contrast to the world bustling around him. Middle-aged now, his once strong frame had become worn, each line on his face etched by the weight of years spent on the streets. His eyes, dark and haunted, told stories of a past that refused to let him go. He had once served his country with pride, standing side by side with others in uniform, fighting for something bigger than himself. But the war had left more than scars on his body, it had carved deep wounds into his soul. For Tom, the streets had become both home and prison. Pride and distrust kept him away from the help offered by others. He had seen too much in his life to believe that anyone genuinely cared. People walked past him, avoiding his gaze, but they never saw him for who he truly was, a man who had given everything and lost everything in return. Help? He didn't need it, not from anyone. He had passed the soup kitchen countless times, the smell of warm food wafting through the air, a constant reminder of his hunger. Yet, he never stopped. To him, standing in that line was a symbol of defeat, a surrender to a system that had failed him long ago. Every day Tom struggled to survive on the streets. He woke up in a cold alley, hungry and tired, always wary of the dangers lurking around him. The city was no place for weakness, and Tom had learned to avoid troublemakers, always searching for scraps to fill his empty stomach. Nights were no better. He found a spot to rest, but sleep never came easily. The fear he carried from his time in the military never left him. The street felt as dangerous as the battlefield, and he couldn't let his guard down. Tom often thought back to his military days, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose. But those memories were haunted by loss and trauma. The friends he'd lost in battle and the ones who couldn't escape their own demons stayed with him. Despite the hunger, pride kept him away from the soup kitchen. He saw it as a sign of defeat, something he refused to accept. He would survive on his own, even if it meant suffering. He wouldn't let anyone see his weakness, even if he felt like a shell of the man he once was. But the hunger was taking its toll. His body, once strong, now felt fragile. The cold gnawed at him, and exhaustion clouded his mind. He wasn't sure he could make it through another night. Sitting in an alley, fear crept in for the first time in years. He might not survive. His pride had always been his shield, but it was slipping away. The soup kitchen down the street, with its smell of food, seemed less like defeat and more like a last chance, but he couldn't bring himself to walk in. Just as he struggled with the decision, the sound of laughter and voices broke through. Tom hesitated, staying hidden in the shadows until a voice froze him in place, one he hadn't heard in years. It was Sarah. Tom stayed frozen in the alley, his heart pounding as he heard Sarah's voice. The familiar sound of her laughter, so alive and unexpected, made him feel paralyzed. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, but the memories it brought back were too overwhelming. Peering out, he could hardly believe his eyes. There she was, Sarah, standing in the soup kitchen line, just like so many others. She looked worn down, her face tired and drawn. The woman who had once been his lifeline in the military, strong and unshakable, was now standing in a line for help, vulnerable and broken. The shock of seeing her like this hit Tom hard. He had always thought that Sarah, with her strength and resilience, would be okay, that she'd found a way to move on after the war. But here she was, just like him, struggling to survive. It was hard for him to reconcile the soldier he once knew with the woman he saw now. She had been the one who kept them all going in the worst of times. Seeing her in this state humbled him in a way he didn't expect. He had always believed that he was the only one who had fallen. But now, with Sarah standing there, just as broken, he realized that pride had isolated him, and he wasn't alone in this struggle. The realization that even Sarah could fall, even she needed help, tore at him. If she could end up here, maybe asking for help wasn't a weakness. It was survival. For the first time, Tom felt the weight of his own pride and how it had kept him from reaching out. And now, seeing Sarah so fragile, he wondered how he had let it come to this. His mind swirled with thoughts, each one more overwhelming than the last. How had he allowed himself to become this person? The man who avoided help, the man who isolated himself, the man who thought he could handle everything on his own. It seemed so clear now, so selfish. He had let his pride blind him, pushing away the people who could have helped him, and now he realized that his refusal to ask for help had hurt others too. Sarah, standing here in front of him, was a reminder of everything he had failed to see. As he watched Sarah speak to the volunteers at the kitchen, a deep sense of guilt consumed him. She seemed to be struggling with the same emotions he was. Her words were quiet, hesitant, but there was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes as the volunteers handed her a meal. Tom could see it, the same resignation he had felt for so long, that quiet acceptance that life had dealt them both a hand they didn't deserve. It was a look he knew well, one that came from being on the edge for too long, of seeing no way out. And yet, despite everything, Sarah was still trying to survive. She was accepting the help, even though every part of her probably wanted to refuse it, to walk away with her pride intact. She wasn't just asking for food, she was asking for a moment of dignity, a moment of humanity in a world that had turned its back on her, and seeing her like this made Tom realize just how much he had been fooling himself. He had always thought of pride as something that defined who he was, something that kept him from being weak, from falling into the trap of depending on others. But now, standing there, watching Sarah, he saw it for what it really was, a barrier that kept him from healing, from moving forward. Tom's hands clenched at his sides, the tremor in his fingers betraying the storm raging inside him. The shame was overwhelming, but so was the pull to change. What if he wasn't the only one who needed help? What if he could stop hiding, stop pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't? For the first time in years, Tom felt the weight of his pride shift, the realization that it was time to let go of the walls he had built around himself. Sarah, someone he had always admired, someone who had been by his side in the darkest moments, was here, standing in line, needing help. And if she could do it, so could he. A sense of clarity washed over him as he made his decision. He would stop hiding, he would stop running from the truth. With a deep breath, Tom pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt shaky, weak from days of hunger, but he ignored the pain. He stepped forward, into the line, his heart pounding in his chest. The first step felt like a monumental shift, a quiet rebellion against the pride that had kept him isolated for so long. As he stepped closer to Sarah, their eyes met. There was no judgment in her gaze, no surprise, just the simple recognition of two people who had been through hell together, both of them struggling to survive in a world that had forgotten them. For the first time in a long while, Tom didn't feel alone. He was no longer hiding in the shadows. He was stepping forward, facing his own weakness, and for the first time he felt like he could breathe. Tom's feet felt like lead as he slowly shuffled forward, each step a battle against the weight of his own shame and hesitation. His heart was pounding, not from fear of the cold, or the hunger gnawing at his stomach, but from something deeper, something harder to name. For years he had avoided this moment, had kept his distance from the one thing he feared most, admitting that he needed help. The soup kitchen felt both distant and close, the line of people moving forward with a steady rhythm. Tom kept his eyes on the ground, unwilling to look up, as if looking would make this decision too real. He tried not to notice how close he was to Sarah, the woman who had once been a cornerstone of his life. She was standing in front of him, just ahead in the line, her back was to him, and she still didn't recognize him. He could see the way she held herself, her shoulders slightly slumped, her gaze distant, as if she had long ago resigned herself to a life she never asked for. Every inch closer he got to the front of the line felt like a mountain to climb. The warmth of the soup, the thought of finally eating after days of hunger, did little to ease the knot in his stomach. He wasn't sure if it was hunger or something deeper, something more painful, that was holding him back. Finally, it was his turn. The volunteer, a young man with a tired smile, handed him a warm bowl of soup. Tom looked down at the bowl, the steam rising up like an offering. For a moment he simply stood there, unable to bring himself to take it. The thought of accepting something, anything, felt like a betrayal to the man he used to be, the soldier who had never relied on anyone. But the warmth of the soup was undeniable, and the hunger was too much. His hand reached for the bowl, but just as he was about to take it, he heard a soft voice call his name. Tom. His heart stopped. He looked up and their eyes met. Time seemed to slow, as he stared at Sarah, her face both familiar and changed. For a moment he didn't recognize her either. There was a softness in her features now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there when he last saw her, so many years ago. But as the recognition hit, a flood of memories crashed into him. The late-night conversations, the shared moments of fear and camaraderie, the way they had relied on each other to survive the chaos of war. Sarah. His voice was barely a whisper, choked with emotion. He couldn't believe she was standing here, the same woman he had thought about countless times but never imagined he would see again, let alone like this. They stood there, staring at each other, both taken aback by the rawness of the moment. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Tom could see the surprise in Sarah's eyes, the disbelief that mirrored his own, and then, slowly, her face softened, recognition dawning on her as the pieces fell into place. Her lips trembled, and before Tom could say another word, she stepped forward, her arms opening to him. Without thinking, he dropped the bowl of soup, the warmth of it forgotten as they embraced. Tears welled up in his eyes, hot and sudden, as Sarah's arms wrapped around him. He didn't know if it was the exhaustion, the hunger, or the overwhelming relief of seeing someone he cared about again, but he wept. He wept for all they had lost, for all the years they had spent apart, for the lives they had both endured alone. In that embrace, something shifted in Tom. For the first time in so long, he didn't feel so broken. The walls he had built around himself seemed to crumble just a little, replaced by something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Connection. They pulled back, still holding on to each other, and Sarah wiped a tear from his cheek. "You didn't have to do this alone, Tom," she whispered. He nodded, the words lodged in his throat. There was so much he wanted to say, but for now, the silence between them was enough. They had both fallen, both hit rock bottom in their own ways, but in this moment there was hope, hope that they could rise together. Tom's chest felt lighter than it had in years. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a future that wasn't defined by survival. He saw the possibility of healing, of rebuilding. Asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The realization hit him hard, but it also filled him with a new sense of strength. He wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was all they needed to start climbing out of the darkness together. Tom and Sarah found a small table in the corner of the soup kitchen. The room was bustling with people, but in that moment, it felt as if they were the only two in the world. The bowls of soup between them were simple, nothing extravagant, but it was the first real meal Tom had had in days, and something about sharing it with Sarah made it feel different. They ate quietly at first, the warmth of the soup soothing their tired bodies. But as the minutes passed, the conversation began to flow. Sarah spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken pain. She talked about the war, how it had never really ended for her, how the scars from those days had followed her, even into the life she tried to build after. Tom listened, his heart heavy with the shared understanding. His own story spilled out too. The nights on the streets, the days spent avoiding help, the loneliness that had crept in with the years. They spoke of their losses, the friends they'd buried, the memories they'd tried to forget, and the ways they had each tried to survive. The words flowed easily between them now, like an old friendship that had never truly been lost. For the first time in ages, Tom didn't feel the need to hide the parts of himself he had been ashamed of. Sarah didn't judge him. She didn't see the homeless man in front of her. She saw him, the soldier, the friend she had known, the person who had fought beside her when the world was falling apart, and in her eyes, he saw that same person, still worth something, still capable of hope. As they finished their soup, they made a pact, silent but understood. They would not let each other fall again. They would help each other, no matter how hard it got. They would be each other's strength. When they finally stood up and left the soup kitchen, Tom felt a shift in the weight he had been carrying for so long. The emptiness that had once consumed him seemed a little less heavy. The road ahead would be long and difficult, he knew that. There would be setbacks, and struggles, and moments where they both might want to give up. But for the first time in a long time, Tom felt like he wasn't walking it alone. He looked over at Sarah, and for the first time, he saw the possibility of something different, something better. There was a way out of the darkness, he realized, even if it wasn't what he had imagined. Sometimes, the light came from the most unexpected places: a warm meal, the kindness of a stranger, and the bond between two people who had once lost everything, only to find that they still had each other. If you enjoyed Tom and Sarah's story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional, heartfelt tales like this. Your support helps us bring more stories to life, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Share your feelings or experiences in the comments below. And if you know someone who might need a little reminder that no one is ever truly alone, be sure to share this story with them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.